Okay, welcome everyone to SRFC Online. This evening, I'm very pleased to be talking to Peter McLean, whose new book, The Priest of Gallows, launches today. He'll be giving a reading and then talking about his books and quite possibly plenty of other things. But before we get going, this is a live broadcast, so as ever with live events, please bear with us if anything goes wrong. We hope we've got it sorted, but you never know. Once we've finished, a recording of this talk will appear on Facebook and our YouTube channel, where you can find more than 100 readings and interviews from and with science fiction and fantasy authors. There's a lot to look at. Do spend some time looking around there. But now, our guest today came to SRFC back in 2018 to talk about his new series, which started with The Priest of Bones, which is a cracking read. And so, it turns out, is the whole series, the third of which launches today. And it's a series that, as well as being a terrifically addictive read, can boast a fresh take on classic low fantasy. It follows the fortunes of a discharged military priest who establishes a mafia-like empire and takes on high society itself. But inevitably, competitors, magic, spies, and a very much greater intrigue are all at work. So sit tight for a reading from the sometimes gritty world of The Priest of Gallows. I'm very pleased to welcome back Peter McLean.
Good evening, everybody. I'm glad you're able to join us. Hello, Magnus. I want to do you a short reading from the first book, Priest of Bones. Priest of Gallows is out today, and I'd love to read you something from it, but it would just be spoilerific. So what I'm going to do is a little bit from Bones, very briefly, to give you an idea of how my main character, Thomas Piety, sees his role in the world. So a little bit of context. Thomas and his brother Jochen have been fighting at war as conscript soldiers for the last few years. They've recently returned to their home city of Ellenberg, where they were gangsters before they were dragged off to fight. And Thomas has been contacted / press ganged into the service of the government by a spy by the name of Ailsa. And so we joined them at Thomas's tavern, the Tanner's Arms. When we got back to the Tanner's Arms, I found Ailsa there waiting for me, with Brack beside her. Ailsa was behind the bar, and there was a hostile tension in the air between the two women that I could only feel the moment I walked into the tavern. Mika and Black Billy led the boys in a chair when I walked in, and I grinned and sketched a mock bow that got a laugh. "The golden chains is ours again," I said to my aunt, and got another chair for my trouble. My aunt was not cheering. "I hear you're quite the hero," Inaid said. "The local boy who stood up to the villainous outsiders and won. What a load of fucking horseshit." The room went quiet when she shouted at me, and I narrowed my eyes as I met my aunt's piercing one-eyed glare. "Of course it's all shit, Auntie," I said. "All shit makes things grow, and the legend of the pious men is even now growing out there on our streets. That's good." "Is it?" she snapped. "Is it good, Thomas? The pious men are businessmen, but you have turned them into soldiers. A pitched fucking battle on the streets with crossbows, on the edge of Traders' Row of all places. How's the governor supposed to take that?" My aunt was giving me a telling in front of almost my entire crew, and I couldn't let that pass. I slammed the flat of my hand down onto the table in front of her to shut her up. I leaned over her and spoke quietly, but in a voice that I knew the whole room could hear. "He'll take it with his taxes and keep his nose out of my business like he always has," I said. "Do not, my dear aunt, tell me how to run my business. Don't ever do that." I stood up and straightened my coat, and I walked across a tavern that was utterly silent. I went upstairs to my room, and Ailsa followed. She closed the door behind her and stood there looking at me as I stripped off my coat. It was stained and damp from the cells, and it smelled of shit. I tossed it on the floor and turned to face her in my shirt sleeves. What was that all about? She demanded in her sharp Dansburg voice. Just then I would have welcomed common, funny, flirty Ailsa, but it seemed I was getting the other one. I was getting Ailsa, the Queen's man, whether I wanted her or not. I can't have my aunt giving me a telling in front of the men, you understand that, I said. I have certain expectations to meet. Yes, I grasp that, she interrupted. Why was she giving you a telling, I mean? I thought that old harridan was part of your operation before the war. Aye, she was, I said. I sat down in the chair and sighed. Things are different now, Ailsa. Before the war, aye. The pious men were businessmen, as she said. Jochen and me and Alfred and Donald and the others. Me and Jochen were the violent ones when we had to be, and that wasn't often. Since we came back, things had changed, and not to her liking. Your business was built on violence, she said. No, it wasn't, I said. It was built on the threat of violence and the capability for it, but very seldom the reality of it. In Ellenberg, it is enough to be seen as violent, as potentially violent. People are weak, Ailsa, and the poorer and more oppressed they are, the weaker they become. When I gave up bricklaying and became a businessman, me and my brother and two friends walked into this tavern and we made them an offer. We offered to protect them from having their business burnt down in exchange for a weekly tax. They paid. So did the baker, so did the chandler, so did the cobbler. Soon after, Stink was paying us to protect them. To protect them from yourselves, yes, I understand that, she said. And when someone else threatened them? Aye, then we did what we said we'd do. Protection's protection, after all. The gut cutters were a new outfit then as well, down in the Wheels. When they sent lads down the river path to try their luck in the Stink, we showed them how unwise that was. Twice that happened, no more. Then a border was drawn up and everyone went back to doing business in their own neighbourhoods and leaving each other alone. That was just how it worked. When I had enough money, I came in here and I told the owner I was buying his tavern, and he didn't refuse me. No violence was done. It wasn't necessary. Do you see what I'm saying? That the past was glorious, that the sun always shone, and you were firm but fair, and you never really hurt anyone, Ailsa said, the sarcasm dripping like venom from her lips. Yes, Thomas, I know very well what you're saying, and it's about as true as the face I gave Bloody Anne last night. The past is as scarred and bitter and ugly as your second is, and you know it. That was going too far. I was on my feet in a moment, my hand around Ailsa's throat as I forced her back against the wall. Don't you ever insult Anne like that, I hissed in her face. Don't you fucking dare. I felt the unmistakable presence of steel against the inside of my thigh in the killing place. It would be very wise of you to take your hands off me and never put them back, Ailsa said. We stood there for a moment, me with my hand around her throat and her with a dagger I hadn't even known she had, held a whisker away from taking my life. She had me at a disadvantage there, I had to allow. I let go and took a step backward, and Ailsa made her blade disappear again. You can hide a dagger very well indeed behind enough lace. I remembered her telling me that once, but it seemed a barmaid's apron served well enough. I'd underestimated her, and I wouldn't make that mistake again.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. That was a really good reading. That was absolutely excellent. You know, when I first read the first book, because you came to talk to SRFC with the first book, I read it in Sean Bean's voice. and then you came and gave your reading, and I read the next 2 books in your voice.
Wow, that's good to hear. That's really good to hear. Yeah.
Well, congratulations on launch day. How's it been?
Thank you. It's been fantastic, honestly. There's Joe Fletcher Books have organised a really, really excellent social media blast today, and I'd just like to thank my publicist Ella Patel for doing such a good job. It's been wonderful. My phone is red hot with smoke coming out of it with all my social notifications. Some of the early reviews have been fantastic. I mean, Nils at Fantasy Hive and Michael at Track of Words have done me wonderful reviews that I'm really, really grateful for. It's been a good day.
Yeah,
needless to say, I've had the day off from the day job today.
Well, absolutely deserved. Yeah, it is a really, really good book. I've reread the first book. I read the next 2 books in succession immediately afterwards. I had a smashing time. It's such an addictive read. It's so
I'm glad to hear it.
Lots of people will be familiar with the first 2 books, but some of them won't be. So I wonder if you've given us lots of insight about this that was a good reading for the philosophy of a couple of the main characters. But I wonder if you could give us a bit more about the world in which it's set.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I did an interview with a historian and HEMA reenactor called Greg Mealy, who's a very, very knowledgeable guy. And he wanted to talk to me about this because if you look at it from a historical time period, it doesn't work. I will be the first to admit that, and it is completely deliberate. So I've got a very distinct boundaries between the social classes, and the way I wanted to show it was through the muck and grime and squalor of Tudor living compared to the grandeur of Regency living, where the upper classes are. And because it's fantasy and not historical fiction, you can do that. So Ellenberg is, pigs and chickens in the streets and midden heaps in the alleys and all this sort of thing. And you go to Dansburg in book 2, and it's Georgian mansions and great country homes kind of thing. And I just find it's an easier way to draw those sort of social comparisons. I think it's to draw on what people think they already know. You know what I mean? I mean, everybody knows what the Dark Ages look like, and everybody knows what a Regency romance looks like. So it just paints the picture, I think. But yeah, so I mean, in terms of the general setting, we open Priest of Bones with the characters returning from war. So they were all conscripted. None of them were professional soldiers. And it's the first major war that the country's had where black powder and cannons were a major feature. Because I wanted to do the coming home from the Great War kind of vibe.
The First World War.
Yeah, exactly that. And, the battle shock, as I call it, PTSD from the noise. I mean, these people recruited from an agrarian society would just never have heard anything like it. And the impact of the constant hammering of cannon day and night and charging lances and all that sort of thing, I just thought was a really good parallel to the horrors of the First World War, the shelling, the first tanks, that kind of thing. So they've come back. They're all obviously very damaged by the war, as conscript soldiers always are. The main character, Thomas Piety, and his brother Jochen were in different regiments in the war, but they meet up again on the road home to Ellenberg, their home city where they were born. And they were gangsters before they went to war, and they'd left their aunts in charge of their business empire of brothels and taverns and gambling dens and things. And they find that while they've been at war, they've all been taken away from them by a rival gang, and their aunt has had to take refuge in a convent for her own protection. And that's kind of where we come in, with Thomas reclaiming his original tavern and springing his aunt from the convent and starting to put his empire back together. And
yeah, it's I thought this was I've read a fair bit of fantasy. I thought this was a really good new take on it. There've been gangs in urban settings before, but this was actually about the gangs and the gang warfare. And it's in fact one of the things I was thinking while I was reading it is that it must be very satisfying to come up with this idea, and also a bit nerve-wracking that you might have worried someone else was going to as well.
It wasn't. I don't know that I'm the first person to do it. I mean, Scott Lynch's Loch Lamara is more of a con man than a gangster, but it's still criminal fantasy. And Dan Polanski.
Well, this one's about gang empires, I think.
It is. Yeah. I mean, Dan Polanski's Lowtown. I haven't read those yet, but I gather the main character's a drug dealer, and you get criminals in fantasies. But yeah, I wanted to write about proper organized crime in a fantasy world, because they're two of my favorite things. I love the crime genre. I adore The Godfather and Peaky Blinders and Goodfellas and Scarface and all that kind of thing. Absolutely wonderful. And I remember I originally got the idea. I was reading Joe Abercrombie's Best Served Cold, and there's a small scene where Schenkt, the super assassin, turns over a fantasy drug den, and the guy that's running it is a gangster. And I thought, no, I want to write about that guy, not the assassin. Assassins, everyone writes about assassins. I want to write about the guy that owns the drug den, and that's kind of where it came from.
Yeah, it's and it feels very natural the way that it's extracted. That I suppose we ought to mention the protagonist is a military priest.
He is the
Yes.
the titular priest
Yes.
of all the titles. Now, he's a priest, shall we say? He's not what you'd call an overly religious man, but in the army. In this setting, I have no idea about real world armies. I know they have chaplains, but I don't know. I'm not a military man. But in the setting, the priest is a leadership position of each company, and he's basically there to hear confession, and it serves a kind of commissar sort of role almost. Very similar to the commissars in Warhammer 40,000 that I also enjoy and have written for. So the company priest died in an assault on Avignon during the siege, and because the captain, who's, although never named, another one of my favourite characters, the font of all wisdom, the captain knows Thomas was a gangster and knows he has leadership experience, basically says, Piety, you just volunteered, you're a priest now.
And it turns out to be very useful for, certainly in the first book, when he's sort of getting the gang together to sort of manage and broker information, because he's taken confession from all of these people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yes. Now Thomas he's not an educated man, but he's nobody's fool, and he runs on the principle of knowing the levers that move somebody, and if you can get people to tell you your confession, you know them inside out, and that just helps him maintain his control over his gang and anybody he can get his claws into, basically.
And that comes, in fact, exactly that phrase, knowing the levers and the weaknesses of people is something that he refers to a lot. And he's it's written in the first person. It's a very fluid narrative from his perspective. And one of the things that I really felt came over is that he was insisting that he was a particular kind of person, that he wasn't educated and so on. He's clearly incredibly insightful, to the point where at one point he quite often actually makes a comment, some people might understand the philosophy of running society or royalty or whatever, but that's none of my business. And you sort of think, you kind of have got that, you do have that insight.
Yeah, Thomas is one of those kind of professional working class people that would never admit he's as intelligent as he is, but he's not educated. It's more of a kind of animal cunning, I think, really. He only did a few years of school. He can just about read and write and do a little bit of maths, and that's about it. He doesn't know anything about history or geography, but he knows people. He understands people, and he is absolutely ruthless in making use of that understanding. I think that's a big part of his character.
Yeah.
Even his closest friends. I mean, he pulls Anne's levers every chance he gets to get her to do what he wants.
Well, I think, it's one of the questions which you explore throughout, in a bigger and bigger way throughout the three books, is he moral? Is he an anti-hero? What happens?
It's an interesting question. Is he moral? I mean, at a micro level, no, obviously not. He's a fucking gangster. The man makes his living extorting people, or used to make his living extorting people. At a macro level, I think he is. I mean, he's doing everything he's doing to prevent another war, because having been through the horror and trauma of being a conscript at Avignon, another war is the last thing he can possibly imagine. So he thinks, like every villain in history, he thinks he's doing the right thing. I don't go for moustache twirling, I'm evil because it's fun, Dark Lords. I don't believe in them. I don't think anybody's like that.
Yeah.
People may do what they think is the right thing, even when the right thing is making themselves rich and powerful. But I don't think anybody has ever gone out and said, I'm going to go out and be evil because I'm evil. It's not a thing. So Thomas thinks everything he's doing, however much he hates doing some of it, is ultimately serving the greater good because he's been told it is. And I'm getting a little bit spoiler wary now, but he is told of the danger of the next war by Ailsa, who, for all that Thomas falls in love with her, works for the government. And you have to remember that when you're reading it, all the facts that you know are only ever what Thomas knows, and they're only ever what he has been told and or figured out. There's no omniscient narrator handing out word of God facts here. It's very much Thomas's perspective.
And chucks up revelations, so it's a revelation to the reader as well. There's something at the end of the book too, where one perspective of a character was completely changed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I like to leave a book on a good gut punch.
Yes. There's and I think, since you've raised that, one of the things that did occur to me is that he was super aware of other people's levers, but seemed to be unaware of this one for himself. That he really was being he would have a self-interested position, and Ailsa could change it by bringing up the war and the prospect of another one.
Exactly that. Yeah. I touch on that in Gallows. He's beginning to realize who he is by the time Gallows comes around. And there's a line, he says, respect, power, authority. Those were the levers that moved me. He's starting to get the idea. What he hasn't quite twigged yet is how certain people are pulling some of those levers, but he'll get there.
I suppose that means that we ought to mention that it becomes apparent as the books progress that the Gangster Territory War, which is taking place in one city, is hosting a proxy war for far greater interests. And sort of that comes like halfway through the first book, so I don't think that's a huge spoiler. But the way it develops, the entire power structures that it's dealing with, they're huge, and he seems to be at the fulcrum of all of them.
Yeah, so a lot of it is Piety is a small town mob boss, basically. He's spoilers again. He is recruited by a government agent to further government interests through the use of his small town mob. By the time he is in the capital city doing slightly different things, he's an absolute fish out of water. He goes in thinking, I have no idea how to do this. I'm not a noble. I don't know how to work with these people. And then comes to the realization that they're exactly the same as he is. And the government organization is basically organized crime with the law on its side because they write the law themselves. And that's something I enjoy, that parallel between government and organized crime, because Thomas Piety takes taxes from the people on his streets, and he provides welfare for people in hardship and provides security against outside attackers. And isn't that a government, really, when you squint at it,
And he does it genuinely. It's not I can imagine there being some more thuggish gang bosses where it was just lip service that they'd offer protection, but he seems to.
He does actually do it because it's his neighborhood. He grew up on those streets. He grew up dirt poor with an abusive father and no prospects and no hope. And until he did the thing he did, and went on to found the Pious Men and set himself up as boss of his streets. But he understands these people because he's been one of them, And it comes back to the morality question. Is he a bad man? Again, at a macro level, no, I don't think he is, because he has, for all that he maintains, he hasn't got that bit and he's got no empathy whatsoever. He obviously has. I mean, you have to remember he's a very unreliable narrator, but he looks after the people of his streets. He cares about people he knows.
He's got boundaries as well. He's got actually, it happens right at the beginning that there's something he won't tolerate, and then there's another story which it kind of threads with the all books, but it definitely appears in the first book, where he refuses to engage in a particular kind of business, and then it's sort of like,
absolutely, he's got boundaries, but they get a little bit elastic under pressure. When again, it's the serving the greater good thing. There's a line I like. It says sometimes you have to weigh two evils in your hands and choose the lighter one. And I think that's that an ongoing theme throughout the books is that can you do a terrible thing in support of a better thing or in prevention of a worse thing? And you often find you're probably going to do it.
So I'm just going to pause for a moment and say, if anybody watching live on Facebook, it's the 27th of May at the moment at about 7:25. If anybody's watching live on Facebook and you want to add a question in the comments, then I'll keep my eye open for them. My computer's a bit slow. I might not be able to do that at the same time as a Zoom, as keeping the Zoom live, but I'll see if it works. And if any come up, then I'll ask Peter those questions. Okay. Sorry, just going back to where that was. I think the one of the things I thought you were balancing with both of those is that both Thomas and the character we've mentioned, Elsa, who is the agent from the government, they both become sort of imposters in their way, and you can feel the tension from each of them.
You can. I think it's in different ways. I mean, Elsa is a born imposter. She is a diplomat, a spy, an actress, a mistress of disguise. You never know which Elsa you're seeing or which is the real one. Thomas is kind of pushed into it. I mean, he's this bluff, blunt northern man, son of a bricklayer from slums kind of thing. But put him in a new situation, and he's got this maxim: always act like you own the place. And it's something he's good at, and he's a better actor than he thinks he is. But it's more through swagger and style it out than it is, any sort of intent, really. At any given moment, it's just make the best of a bad situation. Whereas Elsa's is all calculated, all planned.
One of the things that I realise you wrote the book, so you'll know this better than me. But one thing I was sort of inferring is that Elsa had to do all of that. She had to be calculated because her way of being an imposter is basically is subterfuge. She had to be a spy. Whereas Thomas, the protagonist's way, is kind of to slightly bruise through it in his own personality. And so there'd be some people, and in later books when he's mixing with very different parts of society, some people take it badly, but other people are just sort of wrong-footed by it and kind of have to accept that he's got an authority they don't really get.
Absolutely, that.
I thought it was terrifically well done. One of the things about these books is, actually, I'll ask you this as a question. I mean, they are so readable. They just absolutely flow. And it feels like you were quite enjoying writing them.
Absolutely. I can't write anything I'm not enjoying. Honestly, if I'm not enjoying it, why is anybody else going to? This is, to be honest, this is why I stopped doing IP tie-in, because I thought I'm not actually really that into this. Do you know what I mean? But I have a while of a time writing books. I really do. I mean, the same with the Burn Man books I did before for Angry Robot. They were just fun. War for the Rose Throne isn't always as much fun because it's got a lot heavier themes in it and some things that are kind of hard to write about. But I think they're important things to say. And I do enjoy writing them. As I say, I wouldn't finish a book if I got halfway through and thought I hate this thing. I'll just toss that or something else. It's supposed to be fun. I think this is the thing people forget sometimes, or there's a danger of forgetting once you become a published author, is you started doing this for fun. And even if it becomes your full-time source of income, if you let it become your job, I don't see how it doesn't stop being fun. You know what I mean? And I think that's something to be wary of.
Yeah, I mean, I did find it interesting. I think I read an interview you wrote somewhere where you said you wrote a 15-page draft for one of the books, and a 15-page outline, I think.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking kind of like, that makes sense, and it doesn't. And one of the reasons why it didn't is that there's so much happens in the book. I was just sort of thinking, you've got all that in 15 pages. But on the other hand, you're sort of, you do have a holistic view of everything that's happening. You could never feel that something was crunching. It was just always,
absolutely.
Always going through.
So my outlines are more like beat sheets, like if you were writing a movie kind of thing. Right. I don't do a scene by scene. This happens, then this happens, then this happens. That's chapter 12, chapter 13. This happens, because I wouldn't want to write it. That would bore me silly. Once I'd done that, if I didn't outline in that much detail, I'd be bored. Yeah. So I'll write a beat sheet with the set pieces, the major scenes, but I'll completely pants how you get from one to the other. That's the fun bit, and that's where you evolve and things. But I mean, this is a 4-book series. It was supposed to be a trilogy, but it's ended up being there's a story to that. But I've always known the overall shape of the story. When I was writing Priest of Bones, I knew how Priest of Crowns ended. So I mean, that's a lot of story to keep fixed in your head. So I had to outline the whole thing, or I'd just have got lost and forgotten who was dead or alive or where, or all this sort of thing. You'd never do it. But so the 15-page outline was for what was supposed to be Priest of Crowns, which was going to be the 3rd and final book of the trilogy. But I'd written 50,000 words of the draft and was on page 1 of the outline, and I thought there's a bit of an issue here, McLean. Oh dear.
Well, I mean, my take on it was, I mean, we were thinking when we were talking before this of saving the fact that it was a 3-book trilogy, which become a 4-book as a kind of a surprise. But I mean, we're talking about it now, so my thought when I heard that was, well, on the one hand, I was very keen to find out how the story, how it wrapped up. But on the other hand, I was thinking, but another 400 pages of this, that's all right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, if ever there was, it's a book with I think there are 50 chapters a book, something like that. And
somewhere around that.
Yeah, if ever there was a book which was just read one more chapter before you've got to go and do something, it's absolutely this.
But that is entirely played for, to be honest. I deliberately wrote, again, come back to the beat sheets. I deliberately wrote them with thriller pacing. My reading outside of fantasy is crime novels and psychological thrillers, your supermarket page turner type things, and there is an art to that, and it's something I've tried to teach myself to do, and it is the short chapters. Every chapter ends pretty much on a cliffhanger. You're not going to bed, you're going to sit and read another chapter, mate. I had a guy on Twitter today, his Priest of Gallows arrived at breakfast and he'd finished it about half an hour before this call, and I was like, yes, that's what I want. Blaze through it.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this to you earlier. I found that with the last book I was reading it so fast, and it was partly because I wanted to make sure I had it done for now, but also it is you don't want to let that drop. You really are compelled to keep going. It's right. I feel like I ought to mention some of the things which are coming up. This is going to be slightly weird because I want to do justice to the 3rd book, but also not spoil it. So it's got a new, I suppose you'd call her an antagonist. She's an extraordinary character. Did you, being abstract and non-spoilery, did you have any qualms about writing a character like that?
Nope, not at all. Not one little bit, no. I assume you're talking about Ilse. Yeah, interesting you think she's going to be an antagonist. She's
I don't know, not antagonist,
she's
but in this moral sort of
revolting person by anybody's standards. Yes. But did I have any qualms about it? No, I've read First Law, and Glocter's everybody's favourite character, isn't he? So I mean, no problems at all. Would I want to sit down to dinner with Ilse? Probably not, but
one of the things that has been a feature in the books is that magic is there, but it's scarce. There are magic users, but they are game changers. They are super weapons.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the events that, I mean, like the events happen in this way in all three of the books, but one that happens in the final book is really quite stunning. It's you know,
I think I know the bit you mean. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a sort of meta comment about the books. When I finished the first one and I knew that there was going to be three of them, I was thinking, okay, great. So we're going to have sort of like a gangster fight of a book, and we'll get a series of those, and that was great. I was more than fine with that. Very, very happy to read those. But in fact, what's happened is that it's a story about the arc is huge. The arc is way, way bigger than you'd have inferred from just reading the first book.
Oh, yeah.
And you seem to be taking on, I think, sort of like deliberately big political ideas, especially by the third book. You might
exactly
have guessed that there was an aristocratic, conventional oligarchy in the first book. Something very different.
Yes, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think you think about the magic. A lot of it is about societies. So, magic is magic.
Yeah.
In Thomas's country, the cunning folk are looked down on. They're regarded as witches, to be feared and mistrusted. In the capital city, there is, the House of Magicians, and that's completely different. Being a magician is not being a cunning man is being a witch, because they're totally different things. Except then when you come to learn something about the House of Magicians, you realize that actually perhaps they're not the same thing. But then in Scania, which is the antagonistic nation, they're magicians who are more like the cunning folk than they are like the Dansberg magicians, are very highly respected members of society. And it's a comment on societal outlook on minorities, I think, in a way, as to somebody could be valued in one place and reviled in another for basically the same thing.
And there was a real kind of like, you could feel, or I could feel, the tonal shift from there is a sense that there was something benign, mildly corrupt, but not actually damaging about the authorities in the first book, to them being actually a serious problem.
It's kind of the deeper you dig, the more you'll wish you hadn't, kind of thing. Yes.
Absolutely.
Definitely that.
Okay, I've got a question from Facebook here. Do you have a favorite crime series?
Oh, do I have a favorite crime? I don't tend to read the police procedural series. They don't interest me so much. I'm more into the one-off psychological thrillers. I mean, I think I've liked everything Sarah Pinborough's ever written. They're extremely good. I recently read Call Me Mummy by Tina Baker. That came out a few weeks ago. That is excellent, very disturbing. And Katrina Ward's Last House on Needless Street, I highly recommend that. That's a complete head fry. It really is. Excellent.
Everything she's written has been.
I've read all her novels. They are all extremely good. But I've got more into sort of the classic gothic. So I've recently discovered, he says 60 years later, Shirley Jackson. We've Always Lived in the Castle a few weeks ago. Stunning. And I'd Haunting of Hill House delivered a couple of days ago. I've not opened it yet.
Oh, right.
Never read her before, but I was blown away by Castle, so I thought, I'm going to get on the rest of this.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I've got another one. This is about your books. Would you consider actually, I've got a view on this, so I might add an addenda to this. Would you consider your books grimdark? And my thought is, the first one, I'm not so sure. I didn't feel that it was gruesome and they reveled in psychopathy, but after that, I wonder.
Now I'm a bit over the term grimdark, I must admit, because absolutely nobody can agree what it means. Oh damn it! I've been on so many "What is grimdark" panels at different conventions, and you actually end up with, you got 5 authors on the panel, so you've got 5 different conflicting definitions. They are quite dark, yes, and horrible things happen to people who often deserve it. So in that respect, yes, they're very violent and sweary and all that sort of thing. But to me, the term grimdark obviously comes from Warhammer 40,000, you know, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and everybody's got a headache, and you're inevitably going to be eaten by tyrannid, whatever you do, so you might as well not bother, you know. And I think that kind of utter hopelessness that is what I regard as real grimdark. No, that they're not that, but very few things are, in all honesty, because there wouldn't be an enormous amount of fun in reading it. And I'm not convinced a lot of 40k is as grimdark as it makes out it is anyway, because, you know, Gaunt's not dead yet, is he, after 18 books where he should have been in each one, you know? So it is a difficult one. I mean, are they, I mean, compared to Brandon Sanderson, yes. Compared to Oscar Baker, no. I mean, you know, it depends where you put the stake in the ground, really, doesn't it? You know?
Yeah, I don't. To be honest, I don't think they are, even given the ritual event that happens at the end of book 2. I thought that was partly for you to uncover something about the characters, but also in their internal sort of moral logic, there is a will to positivity.
Yeah, I mean, Piety, I'm going to say he is a gangster, so he is by definition not an entirely nice bloke, but he's got a moral code, as you say. He's got lines he doesn't want to cross. I won't say won't cross. He has lines he doesn't want to cross. You compare him to somebody like Marathol Tresar in the Broken Empires of Dust, who is, if Alexander the Great was an actual demon, then, you know, they're very different types of people, you know.
Right.
I love Empires of Dust, by the way. They are superb books. They really are. But they are grimdark. They're much more on the Baker end of the scale than I am.
Right. Okay. I think we're probably going to look to wrap up. I had a personal question I wanted to ask.
Yeah, sure.
I had some guesses as to what the models of the cities in your
okay.
Okay. So things, I've lived in Edinburgh and I've also lived in Norwich, and I think you've lived in both of those as well.
Ellenberg basically is Edinburgh. I mean, it's almost even called Edinburgh. You know, I don't pretend to be too subtle about this. So yeah, if you put the river about where Princess Street Gardens is, the Stink and the Wheels along Canongate, the Great Temple of All Gods where the castle is, and the Governor's Hall where St Cuthbert's is, you're about there, really. Okay.
Yeah. And I think I read in an interview you did a long time ago that you based the pub, the Tanner's Arms, off one in Norwich.
Yes, I did. Yeah. Not because it's architecturally anything like it, but more for the vibe of it. It's this old biker and heavy metal pub I used to go to in the 90s. Shout out to the Festival House if anyone remembers it. It's the sense of camaraderie and, you know, general ne'er-do-wells who were actually diamond gazers. That was everyone in that pub. It was great.
Excellent. Well, because I read that, I went and looked it up, and I'm pretty sure I did go and drink there, but I think it would have been, even had a different name by that point. I doubt it would be. Oh,
yeah, it has gone through a lot of names, but it'll always be the Fezzy House to us.
Right, you are. Well, we've got a question. We've pretty much already hinted at what the answer is. What have you got coming next?
Well, it's funny you should say that. So the War for the Wars. I can't get my own series name right. It's good. The War for the Rose Throne trilogy is now the War for the Rose Throne Quartet, because Pete is unable to plot a third book to wrap up a series without it growing arms and legs and having to go cap in hand to my editor and say, please, Mom, can I have another book? So what I've got next is Priest of Crowns, which I'm writing currently, which will be, all being well and plague permitting, out next year. And that will finally close out War for the Rose Throne. So yeah, it's not a trilogy anymore. It is now a quartet.
Yeah.
I hope this is good news.
Well, for me, it's excellent news. I've sort of
splendid.
Right, this is the book which is out today. It's Priest of Gallows, available from everywhere. I think at least everywhere in the UK.
Yep.
And the first and the second books, this is the second book, are also almost certainly for sale right beside them, wherever you find this one.
They should be. Gallows isn't out in paperback until January in the United States, but everywhere else it's out now.
Okay. So I'm going to say, oh, I've got a last question.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think this is probably related to you hanging out with biker gangs in a pub in Norwich. What are Peter's musical tastes?
Oh, I like all sorts of things, but it is mainly 80s heavy metal. I am that much of a bearded middle-aged man cliche.
Right.
I write almost exclusively to Dio and Black Sabbath and all that kind of stuff. You know, gets the juices flowing. But I like most things. I can listen to quite a lot of classical music actually.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I don't mind a bit of jazz as well. And there's
Good for writing too.
a few things I really dislike, but generally speaking, rock, metal, goth, punk, edit, all the stuff I grew up on, basically.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to hold up these books again so that people can see them. The Priest of Gallows out today, The Priest of Lies and The Priest of Bones, which I don't have enough hands for, which is...
Priest of Bones, you can start with that one. There we go.
Let's get them all on one shot. If you hold that up again, there we are. Excellent. Right. Right, this video is going up on SRFC's YouTube channel, where you can find more than 100 videos. It's really well worth a browse. We have high hopes of a small announcement, organising a meetup sooner rather than later. This video is being recorded on the 27th of May. So please keep your eye on Twitter and Facebook for the details. We don't quite know what it'll be yet, but with luck, it will feature real humans in all their dimensions. So but obviously we're going to be assiduous in sticking to the rules and also trying to keep everybody's safety at the foremost of our minds. Please support authors, and also now that they're open, please support bookshops. Peter's book is available in bookshops in the UK. If you pop in and patronise them, then it will do a world of good for the industry. That's it from us. A huge thank you to Peter. I wish you every success for this story series. It really deserves to do stormily well. It is such a terrific read. And finally, thank you to you all for watching. I hope you have a very good evening, and goodbye.
Thanks, Magnus. Thanks for having me on. Good night, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.